institutions are here. Now, we're going to find out what that means. We've got an amazing panel here today with some combined experience that will leave us in no uncertain terms as to what's actually going on in this part of the market. As a private investor, what I loved about Bitcoin specifically the last 4 or 5 years was the idea that the traditional area of the market was ironically regulated out of being a participant in Bitcoin. And you could front run Wall Street. And so as private investors, it's like, whoa, this is a serious opportunity. And that's happening now with the performance we're seeing. Anyway, I'd like to welcome the panelists today, and we're going to talk through a number of different things. So, gents, I'm just going to pass it over to you to introduce yourselves and give us a high-level description as the backgrounds that you have and the current projects you're working on in Bitcoin. And we'll start with you, Seb.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks. I'm Seb. I have to admit, I'm a former investment banker. That's where the good money was, right? So I went there. I've always liked money as a language to express value, to express moral values even. Back in the day, I first sold my gold, then I sold my stocks, then I sold my house, and finally I sold my shares for Bitcoin. And I readily admit I do have a small Bitcoin problem, but it's a nice problem to have. What I do mostly is I help size and manage Bitcoin allocations within investment portfolios, mostly through also the use of Bitcoin options and derivatives.
Arturo.
Yeah, thank you. Arturo Mengual. I'm from Spain. I have a banking background as well as Seb. Nearly 20 years working in the city in London. And the last 6 years roughly in the Bitcoin space, the last 3 months at Swan. So during my banking days in the city, I had the pleasure of working in the treasury function of one of the largest banks, managing the liquidity during the global financial crisis. So it kind of took me down this path when I had a lot of questions crossing my mind and not getting the answers that I thought were the right ones. So, fast forward, I've been spending the last 6 years working in this space, and so far, no regrets. It's given me a lot of options, a lifestyle, and a purpose. So, I'm here hopefully to share some of those experiences and thoughts with you.
Thank you. Dan.
Yeah, Dan Pickering. I finance background too. I run a funds management business here in Australia. We look after Bitcoin for our clients. We've been doing it since sort of 2017, so we're well into year 6 now. And when we started doing it, there was probably only us doing it, and we're obviously shortly to be joined by quite a few other funds in Australia, and obviously we've got the ETFs in the US competing with us now. So it's been very interesting. I think there's an interesting point you made about front running. What we've been doing for sort of 7 years is front running these ETFs, and they've finally landed, which is quite exciting for us. So yeah, we'll see where things go from here.
Awesome. Thank you, gents. Just to summarize, we have some serious pedigree sitting on this panel right now, and I look forward to diving into what they're going to talk through. So, Dan, I'm actually going to pass it back to you on the end over there. If you were to think back on your career to date and all of the different skills and bits of expertise you picked up during the roles that you had, I love Bitcoin in terms of the personal journeys that people go through, and this is what the real focus of Bitcoin with Jake was. You were kind guests on that show as well. Like, what do these people know that allowed them to see value in Bitcoin? Like, we're still so early. Like, there's not very many of us in this room right now. There's not very many people globally that have adopted Bitcoin in a meaningful way. Well, the ones that have, why did they do it? So to echo this sentiment and conversation, Dan, is there 1 or 2 or 3 things that you experienced during your career that helped you to see value in Bitcoin? And I'll ask the same question to all 3 of you.
Well, I think the reality of my experience was when I first bought it, I bought it because I thought the number would go up. There was nothing in it other than an expectation that I might make some money. And I only did that because I'd seen somebody use it in industry. So I'd seen international transfers happen in the bookmaking industry, actually in Hong Kong. They used Bitcoin, and we saw big transfers happening. And I'm like, well, these guys, are serious people. It's a lot of money. They're using Bitcoin. I thought, well, I'll buy some because, I've actually seen it in action. And only from there, only from actually owning it, did I then get interested. And I think most people's journey starts with you see something. So maybe you're here today and you experience a bit about Bitcoin. You see people that are interested, and it triggers you to buy some. But you're only really buying it because you want to make some money. I mean, I think we've got to be fairly honest about that. But people progress in their journey. It ceases to become about money after a while because, and we've had a panel this morning talking about, you get your sort of time back from Bitcoin. You get a lot of freedom with Bitcoin that you don't have with other financial products. And I think we should probably touch on that as well. These ETFs that are arriving are not the same as a sort of owning real Bitcoin. But people's progression tends to be, I'm interested in the price, I'll buy some. Then they read the books about it, and they're a lot more interested in owning their own Bitcoin personally rather than via a financial product. And that was really my journey to it too. It was price, and then it was a lot more reading. I'm a lot less interested in the price now.
Thank you, Dan. Arturo.
Yes, for me, it's probably dates back many years. So I left Spain when I was 17, and I've been living in many different developed countries. And I always had the same problem. Every time I moved to a new country, I couldn't open a bank account. Basically, when you're not part of the system or the country, it's very difficult to prove who you are and be part of the system. So I always felt that I struggled to participate in the system, and obviously you get through it over time. So that was a bad experience everywhere I lived in. And then probably the most significant one was working in banking during the global financial crisis and managing liquidity in one of the largest banks. And obviously trying to understand how the financial system works and concluding that I just couldn't understand how it works. But the one thing I understood, I think, is something that was mentioned in the previous panel by JP, I think, and that's you see how depositors, so the man on the street, has its savings in a bank account. Suddenly interest rates go down to zero or negative, so they don't have any income from those savings, hard-earned money. And at the same time, the government is obviously printing money to rescue the system, so to speak. And then all these people, so basically the ones that are working hard, saving their money, are losing purchasing power. So basically that's a very simplified way of looking at it. But then obviously that triggered kind of in my mind the idea of, well, we should be able to do better than this, right? So that's when I started to look into Bitcoin a little bit. And I thought that I don't know if it will be the ultimate solution, but I think it solves a lot of problems, or it gives answers to a lot of those questions and concerns I had.
Awesome. Thank you. Seb, finally with you.
Yeah, my story is one of the great financial crises as well. I was in banking, and I was having a very good time, but I knew it wasn't, healthy or sustainable. In that crisis, I personally went back to physical gold, but then I also convinced my bank to set up a big precious metals desk in London. But then all we did was lease gold from, the Bank of England and sell it tenfold over on paper to customers that never would have any real gold. So then that wasn't quite sustainable as well. But one of my traders on the desk early on said, physical gold has some issues, and there's this new thing, digital gold, that overcomes those issues. So I was like, digital gold, what's that? And he said, Bitcoin, that's what. And so I was like, yeah, I'll take some. And went in, had first, same day, and I've been learning about it ever since. Left the bank and just focused on Bitcoin and the good life.
Awesome. And so what I can summarize that in a statement that I love, which is came for the gains, stayed for the revolution. And it's something that I see all the time. And, people will be like, I'm too late. And I thought that too, right? Or I didn't buy enough. But this thing it's a beast that none of us have seen, come into life before. So, I encourage you all to study it. Everyone's had their own mistakes or tuition fees like I described before. So the lenses that you have enable you to see Bitcoin for what it is, and you start looking into it. And this panel specifically is the institutions are here. So let's dive into what that means. Seb, I'll start with you on the end here. What behavior are you seeing from institutions today, which is different from a year ago? And just help us break down what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's not totally right to say that the institutions are here.
Interesting. So they're actually not quite.
Well, they are, but not the ones you think. People see BlackRock is there, Fidelity is there, but it's not BlackRock buying for BlackRock. It's not Fidelity buying for Fidelity. Go to the website of BlackRock. Who are their clients? It's your local hospital, it's your pension fund, it's all those parties. It's a lot of players that have an investment portfolio, an assessment portfolio, and those are actually the parties that BlackRock and Fidelity and everybody are buying for. So in that sense, institutions are here, your pension is here, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay. And Arturo, do you see a lot going on, and what are you seeing?
Well, what I perceive from what's going on at the moment is, well, firstly, I think that we're very, very early in this cycle. I don't think that the institutions are here yet as such, or we're at the very beginning. I think we need to see, as Seb alluded to, we need to see more of the pension funds, insurance companies, banks, to actually, their corporate treasury departments to actually buy Bitcoin for their own portfolios and in a way legitimize it for their customers. And when we see that, that's when I think you will see the institutions really participating. But at the moment, they're just, well, the ETFs, at the moment, they're just facilitating an exposure to the price, nothing else. And obviously, they do it because they can get their management fees out of it, but not because necessarily they want to bring Bitcoin to people as such. Just they want to offer, an avenue to get exposure to the price, I think, but nothing else. So.
And that's a really important point that was touched on before, but you might own an ETF, but it's essentially a piece of paper claim against a bit of Bitcoin. And one of the really, really cool lessons about Bitcoin is that you can take self-custody. So you set up your Bitcoin wallet in the correct way. No one can take that off you unless, there's a number of different ways, I suppose, in terms of like the $5 wrench attack, but this is not a self-custody workshop. We're going to talk about institutions. So Dan, and for yourself, what behavior are you seeing differently in institutions today versus a year ago? And perhaps they're not here.
Yeah, I think what's actually here is institutional products. So institutional wrappers that allow institutions to buy, but the fact is, if you look at every pension fund in Australia, none of them own any Bitcoin. The same is true of all the major pension funds in the US. Now, the good news about that is there's a tidal wave of money still sat on the sidelines. Only when that big pension fund money starts to move in will you see the sort of price appreciation that we're expecting to see. So I think the products are there, but I don't actually think that the money's really started to move yet. I know that people are excited because BlackRock was the first, the fastest ETF to 1 billion, the fastest ETF ever to get to 10 billion. Like, it's moved pretty quickly, but it's not what I would term real money yet, because that's all just sat there waiting. If you also look at the big advisor groups in America that have large clients, none of them have even had the training on the products yet, so they can't put the clients in the product. So not a whole lot's happened. The products are there, but I don't think real money's started to move yet, and it will. And you'll know when it happens, but it hasn't happened yet.
And as a private investor, this is the kind of nuggets of information I love to hear, because it's just a lot of pent-up demand. It hasn't even bought this thing yet. And so, Arturo, I'll start with you. I like a phrase, the Overton window. So it's like, at what point is a fund manager working for a pension fund or an insurance company or whatever the case might be, when does it actually become professional suicide not to allocate to Bitcoin? Whereas to date, perhaps it's like, you can't put Bitcoin in this portfolio. And so that will shift at some point, and it'll be too risky not to do it. And perhaps expand on why the institutions aren't here.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, that's going to take a long time. My experience working in large financial institutions is that they suffer from group thinking to start with, and secondly, no one wants to take a risk. Obviously, everything needs to be approved in committees of all sorts, pricing committees, compliance, everything. So there's always at least one person in the room that is going to feel uncomfortable agreeing to something that could potentially cause them career damage, exposure. And obviously, in these places, compensation, salaries, and all that are very good. So you don't want to risk that. And I don't think that at the moment many people are willing to take that risk. So I think we need to give this a lot of time for the younger people to climb up the ranks in the institutions and make this happen. So I think it's going to be years rather than months or weeks. So
Interesting. Seb?
Yeah, I have a different, more optimistic perspective. I think the phrase gradually then suddenly applies. And clearly, about 200,000 coins have been bought by ETF clients in the last couple of months. And I think we'll see a lot of surprises in the coming up quarterly reports. End of the first quarter, by next week, by April, they'll be reporting. There will be more names coming out, and people, well, they will realize that not having any Bitcoin is riskier than having a small allocation. If BlackRock, if Fidelity, if everybody does it, maybe we should get some. So I think they will start, with a small allocation, maybe 1-2%, maybe rebalance, as it goes up. But I'm more optimistic. I think there will be a run for Bitcoin basically this year.
And I think just to jump on the back of that, you'll see some products released by people like BlackRock that are partial Bitcoin products. So they're launching ETFs that contain the Bitcoin ETF and then other stuff. So you're going to see things like 95% NASDAQ, 5% Bitcoin ETF, right? That's much easier for a pension fund to consume because it's not really Bitcoin.
It's like a blend in an index.
Correct. They're going to make excuses for the sort of fund managers for it to be okay to buy. It's not really Bitcoin. It's only 5% Bitcoin. So you'll see the mixed products will make a big difference. And obviously, they haven't launched yet, but they're on their way.
And Dan, so earlier you touched on front-running Bitcoin products, and so with listed reserve as a digital asset fund. Perhaps you could expand a little bit for the people here today who don't necessarily understand what that terminology might mean, and the products that you've created to date, and how you might see the market expanding around that.
Yeah. Well, our fund's launched in 2018. I mean, the simplest one is the Bitcoin fund, where we just bought Bitcoin and held it for people, essentially front-running products like the ETF. So we've known all along there's a lot of money sat on the sidelines because none of the pension funds, none of the corporate treasuries were invested in Bitcoin when we started doing it. And so, and I still think that's true today. I still think we're in the same position as we were when we started 6 years ago. I think, lots of people look at Bitcoin and I've missed it. But, it isn't true. Like there's the vast majority of the world is short Bitcoin because they don't have any. So I still see the sort of the future in very much the same way as I saw it in 2018. The things that I expected to happen are starting to happen. But it's taken time, and there's a long, long way to go. So I think we'll see a very different space in sort of 5 years, because I think we'll be in the position of what will happen is the clients of pension funds will be saying, why don't we have any Bitcoin? That's where the pressure is going to come from. And if you look at the cohorts that are going to make up pension funds, you're into people that are sort of now in their late 20s, moving into their 30s. People that actually understand digital assets will start to have real money in the next 5 to 7 years as they sort of mature and they progress with their careers, and they get interested in actually what's my pension fund doing. That's where the pressure is going to come from, and you will start to see significant moves. And it will be, you will have to answer, like the boss of, is it Vanguard, who refused to do it, right?
He got sacked,
he's under pressure, like why not? And you'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And it's like family offices, right? People managing money on behalf of wealthy families, and they've got a new generation of family members coming through and saying, well, why don't we own this stuff? and they're having to react to it. And I think that's where, like some of these Bitcoin ETFs, for example, that's where demand's coming from. It's individuals in families saying, I need some. Okay, interesting. And so what I'd like to do, in a sense, is slightly shift gears. So I think we could answer the statement of the panel like, the institutions are here with, actually they're not, which, for us as private investors and people investigating Bitcoin at this stage, that just shouts opportunity to me. It's like, oh, we're at all-time highs ever in every currency in the world that measures it, but most of the big money hasn't even turned up yet. And what Bitcoin is as a value proposition as an investor is very simple. It's supply versus demand, and the innovation that is digital scarcity, which has never existed before. And so on that note, so it's a very personal journey, Bitcoin. You can be sitting at home, you can be reading all this stuff. I started a podcast, I did 80 conversations with people all around the world. And your wife thinks you're mad, your mates think you're mad. You meet some people digitally and they're not so mad. And then you come to a Bitcoin event and you're like, oh my God, okay, maybe there are some people that, think the same way in a sense. Just on personal level, gents, how has Bitcoin evolved your lives? And if why back 10 years, you guys are talking about the great financial crisis and the experience you were having then versus now. So why don't we start here, Seb, and just talk about how Bitcoin's changed your life from a personal perspective.
It's changed my life tremendously, maybe second only to being a father. Bitcoin has definitely made me want to be a better man. It's given me essentially optimism, faith, hope. I was a fairly cynical banker. I was living a good life by any standard, but now I'm living a good life.
Well, and Arturo.
Yeah, for me, it's probably very similar. In my case, it's given me the motivation and a purpose to continue working in something that I'm interested in, and it's given me a lot of options to live the lifestyle I want to live, to be here in Australia now, and basically have a little bit more confidence in myself and the things that I want to achieve in life, and without having to respond to bigger organizations or be dependent on whether I can work in those environments or not. So it's improved my lifestyle a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. And Dan?
Yeah, obviously it's my business now. Spend my whole day sort of basically working for Bitcoin, right? And I have done for the last 6 years, and it's been terrific. I mean, from my perspective, it doesn't let you down, right? It only has to do the same thing every 10 minutes, produce a block. It always has. And that's all I look for. So, I check it every morning on my own node. And, it's the sort of, basically it's the heartbeat of everything I do. So, long may it continue.
And another thing that, Daz brought up so well is this idea of time and how money is linked to time and how that's also linked back to energy. And, when you work in a bank or in some kind of fund, there is a huge amount of time and effort that goes into managing these businesses and keeping them afloat. And I mean, I'm sure that you guys will reflect on the schedules you used to have in previous jobs where, to keep the thing going, it requires all these people to be completely locked in all day long. And I used to be a broker in the physical ship space. And you just have to be so locked into these markets, talking prices, talking indicators, talking different metrics all day long, that if you're not as good as the next door guy, and therefore you're out. And Bitcoin shifts that completely, doesn't it? And so anyone have any comments to that in terms of like how your attention changes?
Yeah, I used to work 24/7. I used to wake up in the middle of the night about my positions. I work Sunday every day of the week, and now I just Bitcoin and chill.
Nice.
It's the number 2 question from our clients to me is, what do you do all day? And
I'll ask you that. What do you do all day?
it's actually the task with Bitcoin is not to do anything stupid, right? And doing less is actually more. It's extremely hard to hold on to Bitcoin through the 65% drops and, guide people through those times of which we've had 3 as a fund. And despite the sort of tremendous performance that we've had, it still does pull back sharply. And so, the whole game is just doing nothing is actually extremely difficult. And that's the name of the game.
Arturo, anything to mention?
Yeah, I was
I
going
can
to
see you
say
nodding.
very similar. I mean, when I was in traditional finance, I think you spend a lot of time, which, in my view, is unproductive, because there is a lot of conversations you need to have, and make sure that everybody's on board with you, and that you get approval for everything. And in my view, it's when at the end of the day, when you think about what you have achieved, I never felt that it was much. Whereas with Bitcoin, is probably the one thing you need to focus on is on knowing yourself and controlling yourself, not to do anything, basically, and just sitting there because you have a hypothesis that you believe in, and all you need to do is to remind yourself that why are you here, and what is your vision of being invested in Bitcoin, and you just don't need to do anything. Just make sure that you don't do anything crazy, and that's where I spend most of my time. Obviously, I have a day job where I need to do things, but
And I'm sure that many of you have seen the movie The Big Short, and I always think of that scene where Christian Bale has shorted the stock markets in the US, and he's just there, just playing heavy metal, the door's locked. That's essentially what holding Bitcoin's like, because you just got to ignore everything else, and it'll do its thing. And what gets me so excited is if you think about the expertise and talent of these guys to my left, that is going to be freed up, no longer running businesses that are rapidly kind of disintegrating in a system that's clearly not functioning. They're building on top of Bitcoin in a way that is on a hard base. It's like a proper foundation to build from, and that's really super exciting. So to talk about the future, and I mean, if the institutions aren't here, then that is bullish, right? I mean, bloody hell, what's going to happen with this price? So if we could play a game for a moment, do we have any price predictions or pricing models that you might share for this next cycle? So, when might we see an all-time high set? I mean, we've just surpassed it, of course, but the halving cycle, it tends to it pushes up the price and then it kind of retraces as Mr. Checkmate spoke about earlier. It takes the elevator up and then takes the stairs down. So, any predictions over the next 12 months or 24 months to share, gents?
Yeah, about a decade ago, I figured that Bitcoin was better than gold, and I said, look, I'm just going to chill until the value of Bitcoin exceeds that of gold. Back then, it was about $500,000 a coin. Now, with inflation, it's about $650,000 a coin. I think in this cycle, we're going to chase that. We're going to get in the multi-trillion-dollar market cap. We've broken the one on the way to two. And then I think we'll get like a Veblen effect, an effect where because Bitcoin is so valuable, it will
People want to buy
become
more.
more attractive. Once it gets close to gold, the rest of the world will wake up to, look, it is actually better than gold. So I'm basically waiting for the 650,000 US dollars or over $1 million Australian.
Well,
Yeah, gold is certainly the target. I agree. I think it's gone past silver. It's the number 6 currency in the world now. It's the next stop is the Japanese yen in terms of market cap. It's a 6x to get past the Japanese yen, and I find the Japanese yen a sort of interesting target because there's no way in my mind when I look at the sort of metrics of Japan and the Japanese economy and its demographics, like it's a downhill slide, right? There's no way the Japanese yen can compete with Bitcoin, and yet it's sort of 6 times more valuable. So to me, that they're the sort of steps along the way. But I think we sort of owe it to people to say that along that journey, it's going to have plenty of dips too, right? So you're going to be dropping 30 and 40%, and when you're sizing your positions, you need to know that you'll wake up one morning and it'll be worth 30 or 40% less, and you'll be horrified, and you need to be prepared for that. So just size positions accordingly. So we can give out big price targets, but it's not in a straight line. And I think that's important to mention.
awesome. Arturo, any comments at all?
I don't use any models or anything like that. I think I just keep
If you
it
could
very-
explain why, that would be awesome.
Yeah. I was about to.
Sorry,
I have a hypothesis based on obviously my experience of seeing how the financial system works, and the only thing I pay attention to at a high level is macroeconomic events and geopolitical issues. Basically, The way I think about it is that, well, with all the developments that we see around the world, geopolitical instability, and you look around the world, and at least half of it is in travel in many different respects. What I think is that when people sit and think about these issues, they will hopefully arrive to the same conclusion that I have arrived and think that they're better off being in Bitcoin. So I don't do any predictions about whether it's going to be 100K by the end of next week or next year or whatever. I just think that the trend is just going to be upwards because the demand is going to exceed the supply when you understand how Bitcoin works. Yeah.
And it's a really good point. So it's very easy to spend not even 5 minutes on YouTube, and you'll find some moon boy that's like, by the way, I'm looking at this trading view graph, and I know that for sure in Q4 of 2024 the price is going to be, 350,000 US dollars. He doesn't have a fucking clue, and no one does. Literally no one does, because we don't have crystal balls, right? We cannot predict price and timeline together. And there's that great phrase that I love. Let's not get it wrong. So some models are useful, most are dangerous, all are wrong. Because you can't tell, right? And so here we are. I personally agree with you. Gold is the target. But the fun part there, and to Arturo's point, Bitcoin is so much better than gold. Like, oh, I want to buy a coffee. Well, you can't do that with a chunk of gold. Oh, I want to save value over time. Or we can't do that when they've built, derivative markets for days on top of the gold price, or they do fractional reserve banking, or all the other different, manner of problems that the gold market has. And so hang on. So if Bitcoin is better at gold than gold, and gold is 10x from here, I mean, it's extraordinary when you start thinking about it. And then you throw into the mix, well, how many dollars are going to be printed globally before that happens? And that's in today's prices, and it's madness. So, anyway, as a private investor, it's the kind of thing that gets me very excited. And as Mr. Saylor likes to say, there is no second best. So, to bring it back to him, MicroStrategy is it's a fascinating example of how you can use financial engineering in the fiat system to accumulate more Bitcoin. And I don't know if has it got into the S&P 500 yet?
It's eligible. Yeah, it's
almost there,
worth
right?
12 billion and it's 18 or something.
So for those of you that haven't heard of Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy before, it's a company in the US that was absolutely groundbreaking in that they basically sold their US dollars in the treasury reserve of the company back in 2020 in exchange for Bitcoin. It's about $300 million at the time. It was a moment that changed my life. I saw a video that was, Bitcoin infiltrates corporate America. And I listened to Michael Saylor talk for like 3 hours. I was like, oh my God. He has a whole team of lawyers and a whole team of accountants and a whole team of rules that say you can't do this, and he still did it. And that for me was the big signal to look a lot closer. But what he's since done is he's used his company as a way of leveraging to get more Bitcoin. So my question to you guys is, as an example for other business behavior, do you think this is the kind of thing we'll see repeated? And is there any specific comments you have to that journey that they've been on?
No, I don't think anyone will repeat it. He's amazing as an advocate for Bitcoin. He's been absolutely fantastic. But the strategy is actually quite high risk. And obviously, when we went through 2022, MicroStrategy, in my opinion, looked a little bit iffy there for a while. So if you want a sort of leveraged play on Bitcoin, MicroStrategy is not a bad option, but you're probably safer in the ETFs. And I think when you get other corporates coming in, they'll use cash to buy Bitcoin. I don't think they'll he's effectively shorting the fiat system. Like, it's very clever. And it's enjoyable to watch. But
perhaps too clever.
Yeah, maybe. But I think, big corporates will buy Bitcoin, but with cash and not borrowing. Because with an asset as volatile as it is, you could really be caught out, and he nearly was. But I love it. I love to watch it. The interesting thing is, if it does get in the S&P 500, of course, every pension fund in America will own some Bitcoin, because they're going to their trackers will have to buy MicroStrategy, which will be nice.
Classic. Seb, did you have something to add?
Yeah, no, I think it will be copied. I think people will. It just makes sense. Borrow. You see private people doing it already. Borrow, like if you have Bitcoin, borrow against it, buy some more Bitcoin, hedge yourself out. It's too obvious. Coinbase came out with a convertible last week for $1 billion. I think we're nearer than we think. I do respect Saylor a lot, of course. He's definitely playing this, but clearly other parties are looking at this and saying, look, if he's doing it, I'll have what he's having. You have to from a competition perspective.
Yeah, you'll see other corporate players recognize that, growth and value creation, say we need a piece of that.
Yeah, my bet, actually, I think I heard it from Danny, who's around here. Like, you got to look at a company that's cash rich, that has a boss that can pretty much do what it's want, and there's not many of those. Most have a board.
That was the interesting part, wasn't it? Is that his ownership of the business was still very sensitive.
So think Zuckerberg and Facebook.
Yeah, the Zuck. Maybe he's going to come out, in a couple of months' time and talk to us about it. That would be classic, wouldn't it? So, gents, we've got a couple minutes left. I'd love to just get some one-liners from the three of you as to what makes you most excited about the next 12 months in Bitcoin. Arturo, we'll start in the middle with you.
For me, is obviously I think the ETFs coming into the space is raising the awareness. I don't necessarily think it's a good thing for Bitcoin adoption, but I think that it's maybe the tailwinds to help people's interest to get into it. And I'm just hoping that as the SEC approve the spot ETFs in the US, that all the regulators start being a little bit more comfortable and open to basically allow people to get exposure, and those players that would like to have exposure but they cannot have it because of their limiting mandates, and that will obviously generate the adoption that we expect, and obviously as a byproduct of that, the price should go up. But yeah, I'm not really focused on the price, although it's a very good thing. I think that without adoption, it's going to be very difficult to maintain the uptrend. So,
awesome, Dan.
Yeah, I think if you ask for a one-liner, I think that nothing's happened yet, right? So,
Cool.
It's we've seen an all-time high before the halving, which you don't generally see. I think there's a long way to go, and mostly thanks to these products. They've got some good features, some bad features. They're not actually owning Bitcoin, but I think as a marketing department for Bitcoin, I think they'll be excellent. And I think there's a long way to run.
Awesome, Seb.
Yeah, I think for me it's more personal. I think it's more about divesting back into a new home and welcoming a lot of new Bitcoiners.
Yeah, interesting. So taking some of the gains from your reallocation into Bitcoin and looking elsewhere, which is an area I really love as well, actually. Well, today, guys, the institutions are not here. And JP earlier, he mentioned Lifehack buy Bitcoin. Well, Lifehack buy Bitcoin plus Dan's, it hasn't even started yet. Those two phrases, and I mean, we should be all buying some more Bitcoin, shouldn't we? So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you, gents.